Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good, good.
We have a little bit of updating on, guess what?
Yeah.
Coronavirus and what's going on.
Yeah.
But really, it comes from coronavirus and what's going on, but it's really about civil liberties, I think.
Yeah.
The purpose of liberty and how the things being messed up. And we're going to look at a couple articles written by friends of liberty.
Yeah.
And the one person we'll be quoting and starting with is Dr. McCullough.
Yeah.
And
You followed him for quite a while, haven't
and
you?
watched
Yeah.
him on. And I keep thinking, why is he different? And the one thing is people can sense that he's credible. You know, like he's telling us the truth and this sort of thing, and intelligent enough. And he's been in the fight for a long time. And the other, of course, we've talked about frequently is Malone.
Yeah.
And he's in the news, and of course, I have to be a little careful with what he's saying today. He might scare people.
Yeah.
But you know what? Sometimes the truth is scary, and I believe he puts it in the right perspective. But I do want to start with Dr. McCullough, and he concentrates in this article, and it appeared on Zero Hedge, was on treatment.
Yeah.
That the treatment got all messed up. You know, they interfered, and especially the medical profession in the government medical, the FDA and NIH and you know, Fauci efforts and all this stuff has interfered where they've done it really the opposite of what they should be doing. They should be concentrating and talking about treatment, and unfortunately, he provides you know, a discussion that shows that they actually didn't enhance, you know, treating the patient and trying to prevent them from going to the hospital. It was they actually prohibited it at times.
Yeah.
So this is rather a sad story. And one thing he thought should have been done, and most doctors would agree, is why did they never develop a protocol?
Yeah.
You know, it just adds to the fuel that says, why trust any of them for anything?
Yeah.
But in tradition, when they were a little bit more reputable, they would devise a protocol and say, this is the best way you do it. But once they get a hint of private doctors developing a protocol, they find how to obstruct, you know, and I'm alluding to the fact of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin has been prohibited and made difficult, so it hasn't been developed. There are a lot of people in the country, they can't you know, regulate every single doctor and patient in the country, and there's been a resistance to this. And of course, there's a big argument going on. Are the people who have resisted, are they right? Or are the people who say you have to follow the rules and do exactly what Fauci says? So this is a pretty important position that we're in this country to make this decision. And obviously, the most important thing I emphasize has been, you know, no matter what kind of a problem you have, whether it's social, religious, defense, that you're better off solving these problems, you know, in a private way, voluntarism, outside of government regulation. And I guess really the chaos is coming from the fact that the decision has been made in the last couple of years to use the bureaucracy. Oh, all we need is bureaucracy and more money. Just think of all the money that's been sent, and think of all the profits. Not millions and billions. We're talking about trillions of dollars, and yet there's a real strong line drawn here between the people who want to practice medicine much closer to what I believe medicine should be like versus the whole thing that no, what we need are more vaccines. You know, and it's probably as sharply divided as that, because the vaccine effort, you'd think with all the evidence that there's questions about this, that they would at least say, well, you know, this is something we should consider and people should make a choice, that sort of thing. But that isn't the case. It's bureaucracy versus freedom of choice.
Yeah. Well, let's put up that first clip, because Dr. McCullough is this is an interview he did with the Epoch Times that was picked up by Zero Hedge. And the headline is Outpatient Treatments for COVID-19 have been suppressed. The suppressed is a strong word. When you look at Dr. McCullough, nobody needs to really refresh, but he's an internist, he's a cardiologist, he's an epidemiologist, and he's the lead author of the first paper published on early COVID-19 treatment with a multi-drug regimen. So he's been there. He's not some guy who just came out of Mars. He knows what he's talking about. And our point, as you suggested when you opened, Dr. Paul, our point of bringing this up is not to say that there is a miracle drug or a miracle protocol out there and to push it. Our point is to say we don't know if there is one or isn't one. But what we're saying is so crazy is why aren't they investigating it? Of all things, 2 years into this virus, they haven't spent any effort whatsoever in looking at what you can do to people. And this is what Dr. McCullough says. There are different stages of this illness. Everyone knows there's inflammation in the beginning and then there's blood clots in the end. So why not treat these things? Why is nobody interested in looking at it? And it's pretty shocking. And actually, here's a quote. If you can put up that second one. Here's a quote from the article, from the interview. Lots of messagings on the vaccine, but zero mentioning on treatment. None. And it's been that way from the beginning. There's a theme here. I hope everyone is starting to get the theme. There is zero effort, interest, promotion, or care about early treatment, people who are sick with COVID-19. But there is a complete and total focus on people who don't have COVID-19 and giving them a vaccine. And I think the right question to ask is why?
Yes, and this quote appears in there, and they're concentrating on people that don't have COVID, and giving them the vaccine promotion is the big deal. But the other thing that the managers of this, and that is the Fauci people, and the government and the bureaucrats and NIH and the rest of them, they don't talk about an understanding about good health prevention, but also working natural immunity into this. If you could identify people who have natural immunity, why, if there's any doubt at all on the vaccines, which is the doubts are growing.
Yes.
I mean, I think instinct for a lot of us was that at the beginning, you need to question this, especially when it hasn't been actually approved. It was rushed through. A lot of money was involved. There was reason to suspect that the vaccine might not be the greatest thing in the world. And natural immunity gets set aside. Matter of fact, they're bad people.
Yeah.
They've been painted as bad people. You hear it all the time on the liberal news stations, how bad these people are, and they're selfish and mean and nasty and murderers because they won't take their vaccine. And of course, we've talked a lot about that, but I think that dramatizes how difficult this debate is, where people come along and just are in denial of accepting traditional scientific medical information that's been around for a long time on immunity. But it certainly is a mess, and hopefully it gets straightened out. But there are still a lot of things to be concerned about.
And I think it was the Brownstone Institute listed over 100 studies showing the superiority of natural immunity. 100 studies. Can they all be wrong? And here's one last clip from the article, in the Epoch Times article about this. And I think this is a very rational suggestion. This is something that you'd think that people would think, why haven't they done this? And here's from the article. McCullough suggests that there be a monthly review of new therapies used to treat COVID, both at national and global level, for doctors to learn and review from their peers. Quote, the idea that if there's no review, you'd think there would be the World Health Organization would actually assign a task force. This is the biggest health problem, and a monthly review of promising therapies would be useful, he says. So it's strange that, because we've heard stories about parts of India, Uttar Pradesh, where that use different kinds of protocols and were successful. We don't know. We didn't go there and check it out. But he's right. Why isn't there a review? Okay, over here he talks about in Bangladesh they use something to do with iodine or something. Did it work? Didn't it work? Why don't you look into it? The World Health Organization, I don't think they're hurting for money. Yeah, but still, no one seems interested at all.
99% of what we hear about in debate on both sides of the argument is who's right about the vaccine or not vaccine. It's a technical argument, but it's essentially rare. It's not all rare on this station, but the principle of how do you solve the problems? Do you do it by government or you do it by voluntarism, outside of the bureaucracy? And very little talk about that. It's always who's making these final decisions. And of course, there's one doctor that gets on every Sunday morning for 2 years, and the people are still bowing to him. That's just what the problem is. In medicine, problems can go wrong, and you can have what they call iatrogenic diseases. The doctor did something and actually caused it. And sometimes it can be inadvertent, and they omitted to do something or did something wrong and they call it commission or omission. They didn't do it or they did something wrong. But I think there's another word we ought to deal with here, is prohibition. I mean, when it comes to what they have done with people with hydroxy, things that you have already mentioned just now, that they've been around and they have been tested, but it's really so important to them to destroy freedom of choice on whether or not they can use hydroxy. The rules are absurd. They don't have a law out there that says nobody can ever use hydroxy again. But in this country, there's a rule that says you have to be in a hospital. So
it's very strange, and then we wonder why. I mean, the obvious answer is there's a lot of money being made by the drug companies to spend a lot of money lobbying, but we don't want to suggest that. Well, the next one we want to talk about, I think if we're ready to move on to the second one, is a similar one, and it's another bad doctor who you're not allowed to talk about. This is Dr. Robert Malone, who was recently banned from Twitter for life for questioning some aspects of a technology that he had a hand in actually inventing, which is the mRNA technology. And interestingly enough, we didn't talk about this before the show, but I noticed that Senator Paul, in disgust over the recent bannings, Malone and also Congresswoman Green, he said, I'm out of here, I'm out of YouTube, I'm not going to do it anymore. So it's interesting how the crackdowns are coming. But Malone writes about this story, and we can actually put up the next quote, and I'll hand it back over to you after we started off. But this is a insurance company out of Indiana, a big company. It's been around since 1877. The CEO says something really weird is going on. He said deaths are up 40% among people ages 18 to 64. And Dr. Paul, insurance guys they're looking at numbers because that means a lot of money. He's talking about we're going to lose $100 million on this. So he's not trying to do a political statement. He's looking at the actuarial tables and trying to figure out what's going on.
And these tremendous increase, you'd think, what they have done so far is they're real anxious to just say, it's COVID, it's COVID, it's COVID, but they're not identified. So this might even be beyond their propaganda that people are dying. And of course, the big question that Malone asked is, could it be genetic vaccines that have a genetic approach to it, which I guess it's never been tested like this before. They've known about that. It's been in the lab. But they've never quite done it this. And so his title to his article is really scary, but sometimes the truth is scary. He said, what if the largest experiment on human beings in history is a failure? What if this is all gone wrong and they've made a lot of mistakes? But there's been mistakes, in medicine that were bad, and they followed them for many years, and they punished doctors who tried to change things because when a long time before they had viruses, just the understanding bacteria. That's not like they knew about bacteria and how it affected diseases for 1,000 years or 500 years. It's just 100 years or two that people knew about that, but they were doing the wrong thing for a long time, and now he's asking this question. But this may be a very, very big question. I think there's a lot of people, will want to go one way or the other on this, but what they need is an honest discussion. This is why they shouldn't silence these people. And fortunately, there's a few fighters out there knowing something about the internet, and they know how to get a message out. And we'll do our best to get our message out. But everybody has the responsibility, and everybody should protest. And C-SPAN had a question on TV this morning. They were having anybody can call in and report. Have they been to a protest? and you know what they're thinking about. Who went to? This is because of January 6th.
Yeah.
Who's been to the protest? And I kept thinking, well, I protest every single day.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody should be protesting if you think you have a link to a truthful statement, a truthful position.
Yeah.
So, yes, but a lot of people now will think that if you're a protester, you're somebody evil. If you go along with, Fauci, then you're obedient enough that you'll get your bonus. One thing I saw the other day with a drugstore, they mentioned this was before the vaccines came out, somebody found out they had. There was a lot of controversy whether it'd be a vaccine, but CVS already had the vaccines in store. They had them ready to go. And so sometimes things aren't news. They're not newsy. They're just part of the plan.
Yeah. Well,
but that's a conspiracy.
That's right. You're going to get in trouble. Well, the company's called One America. It's headquartered out in Indianapolis. Again, 1877 it was founded. The CEO is Scott Dawson. It's a $100 billion insurance company, so it's not some fly-by-night, in the storefront. But here's what he said. We are seeing right now the highest death rates we have seen in the history of this business, and not just at One America, he says. And you mentioned about the COVID. He says, because they need to know this, the insurance companies, they need to know this because it's their bread and butter. He said, what the data is showing to us is that the deaths that are being reported as COVID deaths greatly understate the actual death losses among working age people in the pandemic. It may not all be COVID in their death certificate, but the deaths are just huge, huge numbers. And here's a couple of other quotes from the article. If we can put up that next clip, it's fascinating. And this is again the CEO of this company. He said, what we just saw in the third quarter, we're seeing it continue into the fourth quarter, is that death rates are up 40% over what they were pre-pandemic. Just to give you an idea of how bad that is, a 3 sigma or 1 in 200 year catastrophe would be a 10% increase over pre-pandemic, he said. So 40% is just unheard of. And the last clip from this article, and this is Dr. Lindsay Weaver. He's the chief medical officer for the state of Indiana. He said at a recent news conference, quote, he says, the number of hospitalizations in the state is now higher than before the COVID-19 vaccine was introduced a year ago, and in fact is higher than it's been in the past 5 years. So how, with the vaccine, is hospitalizations higher?
I'm impressed on how these statistics are used to adapt their propaganda. When they needed a lot of cases in order to justify the vaccines and push it along, all of a sudden they bloated the statistics. Everybody died. Remember the statistic that showed that there's no more flu, which was fake. But then they come along and they give vaccines out for 6, 12 months, and they in the position they're in now, the vaccines aren't working.
Yeah.
And yet they say, well, we just need a lot more, or maybe they're over reporting and whatever. But they'll use the statistic whether they want to have more vaccines or say, oh, the vaccines are good. Now they're saying the vaccines aren't so good. So they have to go back to saying, well, we can't give up on vaccines. Maybe more is best.
Yeah.
And boy, now when you think of this, if there's just an iota of truth of this concern about this genetic vaccine stuff, can you imagine these people getting them, twice is a lot, 3 times, 4 times.
4 in Israel, yeah.
And that lady that was on the airplane, what was it, on the 7th time? Yeah.
Well, the thing is, what they're trying to do is rewrite history, Dr. Paul. They're trying to say, we never said that you're not going to get COVID if you take the vaccine. But it's out there. We've shown the videos time and time again. Fauci said, if you get vaccinated, that's a dead end for the virus. Can't go any further. That's not true. Biden says, if you get these shots, you're not going to get COVID. Totally untrue. Over and over again. So they want to rewrite history because the things they said that the vaccine did, it doesn't do now. And so that's a real problem. But do you want to move on to the next one?
Well, let me do
Sorry,
one more on Malone, because he expressed himself on something that has always just really bothered me. Is how I don't know. I don't think he has the final answer. But how did they get this so organized worldwide?
Yeah.
And that's why he claims this is the biggest hoax in the world. He didn't use the word hoax, but I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. He says, furthermore, we have also been living through the most massive, globally coordinated propaganda and censorship campaign in the history of the human race.
Yeah.
And which means, you know, this is, once again, what they're talking about is the absence of free people making their own minds and making decisions rather than having the bureaucrats and the authoritarians dictating it and gaining more power. That is a real problem. And but in order not to finish on a bad note on this subject, is a lot of people are waking up and they're sick and tired of it, and they're hearing it, and the crowds are coming out in protest, even around the world.
Oh, yeah.
And that's good.
I got a clip of one of those later. Well, our final story today is a good news story because we need a little good news. And this is actually, I think we can put up that next clip. 35 Navy SEALs sued both the Defense Secretary, the Secretary of the Navy, etc., about this religious exemptions, because we've talked about this before, Dr. Paul, that it's a farce. They say, oh, you can just put in a religious exemption. Every single one automatically denied. It's fraudulent to claim there is such a thing when there isn't. So these guys sued, and I'm looking for the name of the not-for-profit law firm that represented them, but they are definitely the good guys. So the good news is that a federal judge decided to block the Navy from punishing these SEALs. They're claiming a religious exemption. They don't want to take the shot. And I don't know how long it'll last, but at least now there's some pushback from the judges on this.
You know, the diversity in the judicial system, we've complained a lot about the FBI and the Justice Department and how politicized they've been. But in this case, around the country, because the states have different rules and regulations, people know that it's nicer to live in Florida now than in New York, and you know, there's still a little bit of freedom to move around. But the forced vaccination, you know, is getting attention, and there's been many rulings that have been favorable, but you don't know what'll happen, because you can't even say, well, if there's any problems, there'll be appeals. But once it gets to the Supreme Court, now that we have a conservative Supreme Court, we're sure to have them rule in favor of liberty.
Yeah, don't hold our breaths. We'll be not doing well. The organization is First Liberty Institute, and they're the ones that are helping these guys. You know, it's really disgusting. We've talked about it before. Everyone says, oh, support the troops, they're supporting our freedom. The reality is these troops are being treated very, very badly indeed by the government. But here's something good, though. Let's put up this next one. This is a tweet about this judge who ruled this way, and I like this. Federal judge just granted temporary injunction to a group of Navy SEALs seeking religious exemption from the vaccine mandate. Judge Reed O'Connor, quote, there is no COVID-19 exception to the First Amendment. There is no military exclusion from our Constitution. Sounds like a good judge. There are a few of them out there. We
that's right.
Take cheer.
And they need to be rewarded, you know, in the sense of getting public support for it. So, but you know, this leaves a dilemma for some people. What do you do? I mean, the propaganda is so strong, the vaccine people are so powerful, and the politics of it's tough. The courts might be helping us. People need to be awakened. But what do you do now? And I think it has started. I think more people now know a little bit about health habits and dealing with their own immune system. And that makes a difference, the personal responsibility. And there was this new report here. CDC admits 61% of teens hospitalized for COVID-19 had severe obesity. You know, and this was there wasn't a tremendous number, but and a little bit more than we expected, but small compared to the whole thing.
Yeah.
But the big thing is a lot of this is preventable in spite of all the obstacles the government puts in our way.
Yeah.
So the people, you know, can take it into their own hands, which has to do with eating habits, exercise habits, and the things that you can do that will build up your immune system. And it's surprising if they look into it. There's a lot of things that can be found that's not real expensive, that you can be found in nature, and your immune system, you know, vitamin D isn't exactly a genetic modification of a vaccine.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. Well, all you have to do is look in these carts and you're at the store. I mean, it's really astonishing. No fresh vegetables, just frozen. It's terrible. Well, I'm going to close with a couple of little quick things, if you don't mind.
Okay.
The first one is we talked a lot about Australia. They turned the whole place into an open-air prison, the whole country. They beat people who protested. They're forcing jabs in them. They're sending people to camps, concentration camps, if they test positive. Well, all of that should have totally wiped out COVID because we know all these measures absolutely work. No question. Well, let's look at this next clip. Not going so hot. Australia reports 35,326 new coronavirus cases, the biggest one-day increase on record. And let's look at this. Is Dr. Eli David. We talk about him a lot. He's very, very good. And here's another one. Here is the chart, Australia. Look at all the lockdowns. Lockdown, mandate, lockdown, sends you to prison. Cases in Australia are up 119,111% since the Washington Post said they almost eliminated COVID by putting faith in science. If we put it back up there real quick. And then Ian says, I wonder if we'll get an update on why the lockdowns, quarantine camps, mask mandates, vaccine passports, and incredibly high vaccination rates stopped working. Look at that on the right, Dr. Paul. Cases through the roof. Nothing they did worked. They destroyed the country. They destroyed people's lives. They destroyed businesses, and it had no effect on the virus. Something this big should be happening in Australia, I think.
That's for sure. There was an image of Australia at one time was a lot different.
Yeah.
You know, people from the States were thinking, you know, there's more freedom in Australia,
Yeah.
but I don't think there will be that many more people moving. They may move and shift around our states because some of our states are better than others, and I'm grateful. I'm thankful that is still available. I'm going to close on emphasizing two things that I have emphasized all along to keep people's minds on it, and that is natural immunity as well as vaccine passports, because these are two issues that we ought to draw a red line in to the best of our ability, because they have put some obstacles in there and some penalties there that you have to give deep thought to when people are threatened with a livelihood and taking care of their family and whatever. If you don't do exactly as I say with get a vaccine, if you don't get your vaccine, you're going to lose your job. That is pretty rough. But we should keep in mind these two things, but also defending the rights of people that have natural immunity. I mean, even the principle, this has to be promoted, because it isn't like there is such a thing as a natural right to immunity, immunity. You should have a right to freedom, a freedom of choice. That is the big difference, and that works into it, whether it's a passport, which is a very strong violation of the movement of people, the freedom to move, and just privacy. So those are the threats. They're out there. They've been around before, and we've had our ups and downs, even all the way back to Civil War times. There was a lot of violations of civil liberties in World War I and World War II, and they back off a little bit, but never completely. And what we need is a understanding of why that is the issue, is protecting the freedom of choice of individuals to solve their problems, and with a conviction that allowing the government to take the power to pretend it knows what's best for us. That's what has to be made very clear. want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.